The neighbor's runoff swamped his bottom acres. He dug swales and made it his best field. The water came down the ridge on a Tuesday night in April of 1978. By morning, it had swallowed the bottom field whole. Carl Norby stood at the edge of it in his barn boots. The bottom 12 acres along Tainter Creek were gone under brown water. Not creek water. Ridge water. He could tell the difference by now. Creek water rose slow and ran clear at the edges. Ridge water came fast and carried mud. Carl was 54 years old. Had farmed this same ground in Vernon County, Wisconsin since 1951. That was the year his father handed it over and went to sit on the porch. 27 springs on this land. He had never seen the bottom this bad. The water sat 8 inches deep across the lowest part, carried a skin of silt and old cornstalk trash, smelled like turned earth and something gone sour underneath. The corn he had planted there the year before had drowned in June. He had replanted in July. That drowned too. He stood there until the sun cleared the far ridge. Then, he walked the high edge of the field, counted the gullies cut into the slope above his fence line. 6 of them. There had been 2 when his father farmed it. The slope above the bottom belonged to the old Hagen place. Gerald Stoltz had bought it in 1976. Stoltz was not a farmer by blood. Came up from Madison with money and ideas. The first thing he did was bulldoze the fence rows. The second thing was plow the hillside pasture that had held grass since before Carl was born. The third thing was lay drainage tile across the whole upper field. That tile was the problem. Carl understood it the way a man understands a thing he has watched happen slow. The grass on that slope used to drink the rain, held it, let it down easy. Now the rain hit bare, plowed dirt and ran. The tile gathered what soaked in and shot it out a single pipe at the bottom corner. All of it landed on Carl's 12 acres. Every drop the ridge used to keep now came to him at once. He had gone up to talk to Stoltz once, the fall before. Stoltz met him at the gate, did not ask him in. Carl told him about the flooding. Stoltz told him water ran downhill, always had, said it was nature and not his concern. Charged Carl nothing for the conversation, which was the only thing about it Carl could not fault. By the end of that April week, the water had pulled back to the creek, left the bottom a sheet of gray mud. Carl walked it, his boots pulled out with a sucking sound at every step. The mud was 3 inches deep in places over ground too soft to hold a tractor. He would not be planting that field in May, maybe not in June. He drove the section line to the elevator in Westby that Friday. 2 men at the loading dock did not look up when he passed. Carl knew that look. It was the look you gave a man whose ground was going under. He had given it to others, did not enjoy receiving it. Dale Anrud caught him by the scale house. Dale farmed the next valley over, did not say anything about the bottom. Said he had heard a drainage outfit out of La Crosse was good. Tile and a sump and a pump. Said it plain, the way you mention a thing to a man without making it an insult. Then he went on to his truck. Carl knew what the words underneath were. Everyone in the valley knew about his bottom by now. The drainage man came the next Wednesday. Drove a new International pickup. Walked the field in rubber boots that stayed clean because he kept to the high edge. Took out a clipboard. Measured nothing. Said the only fix was to tile the whole 12 acres, run it to a sump at the creek corner, and set a pump to push the water up and out. Said it would carry the surface water away fast. He wrote a figure at the bottom of the page. $8,000. Handed it to Carl. Said he could start in the fall. $8,000 in 1978 was a tractor. It was 2 years of what the bottom had ever paid Carl in a good year. and the man was proposing to spend it fighting the water, pumping the ridge's rain uphill and away. Carl folded the page and put it in his shirt pocket. Did not say no. Did not say yes. He drove home the long way. Up the Ridge Road, past the old Hagen place, down through Coon Valley. He had not gone through Coon Valley on purpose in years. He went through it now without deciding to. That was where the memory waited. Carl had been 9 years old in 1933. His father had taken him down to Coon Valley to watch the government men work. The whole country was blowing away that year. The dust was coming off the plains in clouds you could see from the moon, men said. And the Soil Conservation Service had picked Coon Valley, his own corner of Wisconsin, for the first project of its kind in the United States. The first watershed they ever tried to heal. Carl had stood in the cold and watched them. Men with transits and plows. They were not draining the water off. They were doing the opposite. They cut long curved ditches across the slopes, followed the lay of the land, threw the dirt downhill into low banks. The ditches ran level, dead level, side to side. They held the rain where it fell instead of letting it run. He had watched a man set the level with a wooden frame shaped like a capital A. A string and a weight hung from the top. When the weight crossed the center mark, the two legs stood on level ground. The man walked that frame across the hill, tipping it end over end, marking each spot the legs landed. The marks made a line that curved like a contour on a map. Then, the plow followed the line. Carl was 9. He had not understood it then. He had only remembered the shape of it. The curved ditch, the low bank, the way the water sat in the cut instead of tearing down the hill. He understood it now, driving home at 54 with $8,000 in his shirt pocket he did not have. The drainage man wanted to throw the water away. The government men in 1933 had wanted to catch it. Carl had 12 acres drowning in water that the ridge no longer wanted. There was nothing wrong with the water. There was only something wrong with where it was going. He pulled into his own yard and sat in the truck a while. The bottom lay gray and dead below the house. He looked at the slope where the runoff came in. The single pipe in the corner, the path the water cut across his field on its way to the creek. He did not need to throw the water away. He needed to spread it out and make it stop. The next morning, he built the level. 3 pieces of 1-inch board from the shed, nailed them into an A, hung a bolt on a string from the peak, set the legs on the shop floor he knew was flat, and marked the center where the string crossed the crossbar. Took him an hour. Cost him nothing but 3 nails and the bolt. He walked the bottom with it that afternoon. Started at the high edge, where the ridge water entered. Tipped the frame end over end. Drove a stake at every spot the string came true. By evening, he had a line of stakes curving across the top of the field. Level the whole way. A line the water would have to lie down along instead of running across. He laid out 3 lines that first week. Each one followed the contour. Each one ran 400 feet, give or take, the length of the bottom. The top line caught the runoff coming off Stoltz's slope. The second caught what spilled past the first. The third caught what spilled past the second. Below the third line, his crop ground started. If the lines worked, the water would never reach it the way it had. He had no money for the drainage man and no money for a dozer of his own. He had an Alice Chalmers WD-45 he had bought used in 1956 and kept running through 19 seasons. He had a 2-bottom plow. And he had a neighbor, Olaf Sime, who owned a road grader blade he was not using. Carl roughed the swales in with the Alice Chalmers, drove the plow along the stake lines, threw the furrow slice downhill, the way the government men had. Made the ditch a little deeper each pass. Followed the curve exactly. It was slow. The ground was still soft. He went down twice and dug the tractor out twice with a chain and a come-along. For the deep cut he needed more than the Alice could do. He drove into Westby and rented a Caterpillar D4 from the outfit by the rail yard. $40 a day. He kept it 2 days. $80. Ran it himself, having run dozers in the service. He cut each swale 18 inches deep at the bottom, 4 feet wide, and pushed the spoil into a bank on the downhill side. Tamped the bank with the tracks until it held. Left a low gap at the creek end of each swale, faced with rock from the creek, so that when a swale filled past full the extra would spill out gentle and run to Tainter Creek instead of tearing through the field. $80 for the dozer. $60 for fuel. Nothing for the level. Nothing for his own labor, which a man never counts on his own ground. $140 against the drainage man's $8,000. The dozer got it close. The dozer did not get it level. Carl walked each swale again with the A-frame after the cut, the way he had walked it before. Found the high spots where the bottom of the ditch sat an inch proud. Took them down by hand with a long-handled spade. A swale that ran level held water along its whole length. A swale that sloped even a little dumped it all to one end and cut a gully there. He had seen that happen to a man's terrace once. He took his time. 3 evenings on his knees in the ditch with a carpenter's line, sighting down the cut. When the water in his test bucket lay flat from end to end, he quit. He finished the last bank on a Saturday in May, stood at the high edge and looked at his work. 3 long curved ditches across the top of the bottom, each with its low bank below it. They did not look like much. They looked like somebody had drawn 3 crooked lines in the dirt with a stick. His neighbors who drove the section line could see them from the road. Olaf Syme stopped to get his grater blade back and looked at them a long while. Did not ask what they were for. Took his blade and left. Carl had heard that the men at the elevator had a word for what he had done. He did not ask Dale Onrud what it was. Did not need to. He could guess. The first rain came the following Thursday. Not a big one. 1.5 inches overnight. Carl was out at the bottom before light, in his boots, in the dark, with a flashlight. The water came off Stoltz's slope the way it always had, crossed the fence line, hit the top swale, and stopped. It did not sheet across the field. It ran sideways along the level ditch instead, spreading the length of the 400 feet, lying flat and still in the cut. By the time gray light came up, the top swale held a long ribbon of standing water. The crop ground below it was wet, but firm, not flooded. Carl walked it without his boots pulling out. He stood there and watched the water in the swale. It was not running anywhere. It was sinking. By noon the ribbon had thinned. By the next morning the swale was empty, but for mud. The 1.5 inches of rain had not run off to the creek and gone. It had soaked into his ground and stayed. He started keeping track. Cut a notch stick and pushed it into the crop ground below the swales after each rain. Pulled it. Looked at the wet line. After the first 1.5 inches rain, the ground was wet to 6 inches. The week before the swales, the same rain had stood on top and soaked in 2. The ditches were not just stopping the flood. They were filling the field from underneath. Carl had farmed dirt his whole life and never once thought of the ground as a thing you could fill, like a tank, and draw back down later. He thought of it that way now. The bigger test came in June. 3 inches in one night, the kind of rain that had drowned his corn the year before. Carl did not sleep. Walked the bottom twice in the dark. The top swale filled and spilled into the second. The second filled and spilled into the third. The third filled and let its excess out the rock gap at the creek end. Slow and clear, no mud in it. The 3 ditches took the whole ridge's runoff and laid it down flat and let it sink. The crop ground below stayed standing, wet but standing. He could have driven the Alice across it by afternoon. He had planted that crop ground late, in the last week of May when the swales were done. Field corn. He did not expect much from a late planting. He got more than he expected. The corn below the swales came up even and stayed green into the dry end of August, while the corn on the hills around the valley curled and fired in the heat. The swales had banked the June rain in the ground. The crop drank it back out slow all summer. Carl took 1,400 bushels off the bottom that fall. Off 12 acres planted late, after 2 years of total loss. He did not tell anyone the number. Wrote it in the same notebook his father had used. Set the notebook back on the shelf by the kitchen door. The drainage man's quote was still in his shirt pocket. He found it that winter when his wife went to wash the shirt. $8,000 to throw the water away. He had spent $140 to keep it. He put the quote in the stove. There was a thing he had not planned for. The runoff off Stoltz's bare hillside did not carry only water. It carried the ridge's topsoil. Every rain, the swales caught that soil along with the water. The mud settled out in the bottom of the ditches and stayed. By the end of the first summer, there was an inch of fresh black silt lying in each swale, the best dirt off the whole ridge, washing down free. And Carl's ditches caught it like a sieve. Each spring after, Carl scraped that captured silt out of the swales and spread it on the crop ground below. He was farming with the soil Stoltz was losing. The same erosion that ruined the man uphill was building the field downhill. Carl did not point this out to anyone. It was not the kind of thing a man said, but he knew it, and he kept his ditches scraped. He added 2 more swales the next year, 5 lines across the bottom now. He learned to read them. After a dry week, he could tell how much water the ground still held by how green the corn stood. The bottom that had drowned every spring of 1976 and 1977 did not drown again. The valley noticed the way the valley notices things, slow, and without saying so. Dale Enra drove down the field road one September and stopped his truck and looked at the corn on the bottom for a long time. Said he had a wet corner himself, down by the spring. Asked, not quite asking, how a man would lay something like that out. Carl told him about the A-frame level and the contour and the bank thrown downhill. Drew it in the dirt with a stick. Dale built 2 swales the next spring. The man from the Soil Conservation Service came in 1981. Younger than Carl. Had a county map and a clipboard, same as the drainage man, but he walked the whole field in good boots that did not stay clean. Stood at the swales a long while. Asked who had laid them. Asked what Carl had used to find the level. Carl showed him the A-frame hanging on a nail in the shop. The man looked at it the way you look at a thing you have only read about. Said the service had done work like this in Coon Valley back in the 30s. Carl said he knew. Said he had watched them do it when he was 9. The real test came in 1988. The whole upper Midwest burned that summer. The worst drought since the dust years. Rain quit in May and did not come back until fall. Corn fired across the valley by the 4th of July. Pastures went brown. The bad axe ran to a trickle, and Tainter Creek nearly quit. Men who had laughed at Carl's ditches watched their hill corn die standing up. Carl's bottom stayed green. He could see the line from the ridge road. The hill corn on every farm in the valley stood gray and curled, leaves rolled tight as cigars against the heat. Then the road dropped toward Tainter Creek, and his bottom came up out of the brown like a different season. 12 acres of dark green standing 8 feet tall in a county that had quit getting rain in May. Men slowed their trucks on that road that summer. Carl knew it because Dale told him. They did not stop. They just slowed and looked and drove on. The 5 Swales had been banking water in that ground for 10 years. The whole bottom had become a sponge. Even with no rain falling, the field drew on what the soil had stored from spring, water let down slow through a decade of swales doing nothing but catching and sinking. While the ridges fired, the bottom held. Carl took 90-some bushels an acre off the 12 acres in the worst drought year anyone in Vernon County could remember. The county average that year was less than half that. Many fields made nothing at all. Gerald Stoltz lost his corn entirely in 1988. His bare-plowed slope had no grass left to hold a thing. 10 years of running his rain downhill had run his topsoil down with it, the same topsoil that had settled in Carl's ditches and grown Carl's corn. The drought finished what the erosion had started. Stoltz sold the old Hagen place in 1990 and went back to Madison. Carl never had the conversation with him a second time. There was nothing to say that the field did not say better. The new owner of the Hagen place was a young man named Pell, who wanted to put the slope back into grass. He came down to ask Carl how the valley used to handle the water. Carl told him to stop the bleeding at the top of the hill. Said it was cheaper to keep the rain than to chase it. The young man seeded the slope to hay the next spring. The runoff onto Carl's bottom dropped off year by year after that. The Swales had less work to do. Carl kept them anyway. A man does not fill in a thing that took him $140 and saved him from going under. Carl Norby farmed that bottom until 1999. Quit at 75, the way his father had, and gave the land to his daughter and her husband, who farmed it organic and called the Swales by a fancier name than Carl ever had. They did not change a line of them. The contours Carl had walked off with a homemade level in the spring of 1978 still ran level 20 years on. The banks still held. The crop ground below still drew on water banked before the daughter was grown. There is a notebook on a shelf by a kitchen door in Vernon County with 2 numbers in it from the fall of 1978. The $8,000 Carl did not spend, and the 1,400 bushels he took off ground that had drowned 2 years running. The drainage man wanted to pump the water out. The man from Madison said it ran downhill and was not his concern. The whole valley had a word for the crooked ditches a man could see from the road. Carl dug them anyway. The water still comes off the ridge after a hard rain. It still hits the top swale. It still lies down and sinks and feeds the field below. Best ground on the farm now was the worst. Same 12 acres. Same creek. Same water that drowned it once. He just stopped fighting it. Caught it instead. Still there. Still level. Still works.